Hi, everybody. It's officially 4:30 now. I'm going to start talking about distributed by design. This is going to be mostly about the culture at Elastic. We're a fully distributed company. We've got folks all over the world, but I'll talk about that a bit later. So you may not know, this is a little bit of trivia, a little bit of relevancy here. Does anyone actually know what our logo is, besides just some weird abstract circle-y shape? It's not an everlasting gobstopper, despite what it looks like. So it's a cluster, right? And so this is all designed on purpose, right? This clusters, as far as distributed computing, are distributed. They're unstructured, or at least loosely structured, and they're diverse, right? Each piece doesn't have to be exactly the same as every other piece, but they still come together and work as a whole. So this is purposely chosen not just because we build software like this, but because our teams are like this as well. I thought that was neat. So briefly, why distributed systems? Why do we use distributed systems at all? I think Rear Admiral Grace Hopper puts it best when she says, in pioneer days, they used oxen for heavy pulling. When one ox couldn't budge a log, they didn't try to grow a larger ox. Right? So horizontal scaling is a good thing. Like, this is useful. It adds value. Probably the research and development to try and continually increase the size of oxen would become cost prohibitive. So there's a lot of value in that. Sometimes we use distributed systems because that's really small up there, isn't it? Because latency is a thing. There's nothing you can do to speed up light. It will take about 250 milliseconds to get from New York to Sydney and back again. That's the cost of it. And that's just like the speed of light, let alone the data processing or anything else that has to happen. And distributed systems give us some fault tolerance, right? We can lose entire regions of the world, and you can still stream movies on Netflix, right? Distributed gives us some value there. There's lots that we can say about distributed systems. We could talk about CAP theorem. We could talk about whether CAP theorem is still relevant or whether it's just to start conversation. But I think the gist of all complex system conversation is that it introduces complexity to the scenario. There's trouble when you have to add time and space into computing. But largely, I think we agree the benefits of distributed systems outweigh the costs, right? I mean, we're not deploying systems in monolithic single mainframes anymore. We're writing microservice meshes that exist on somewhere at probably a data center you might be able to point to, unless it's migrated because something failed. I think we've agreed distributed is good. So do we gain these same benefits with people? As it said, computers are easy, but people are difficult. I don't really think that's fair. I don't think that's fair to what we all do every day. And I think Bridget Cromhout said it best when she said, massively scalable, fault-tolerant distributed systems require significant engineering effort to build and operate. Complex socio-technical systems are even more challenging. That's absolutely true. So with that introduction, hi, Abstractions. Let me introduce myself. I'm Aaron Aldrich. I am a developer advocate for Elastic. We're a distributed company. We're hiring folks. You can stop by our booth. I guess after this talk is the closing keynote, so probably not then. But how about tomorrow? I am an organizer for DevOps Days Hartford. I'm a host of the Elasticast, which is only marginally relevant here, but shameless self-promotion. You can find me on Twitter, and my slides will eventually be updated to Noticed, but I got yelled at because my slide deck was too big to upload, and then I got yelled at because my slide deck was too big to compress. So we'll figure that out later. But that's not really who I am, right? That's my job, the company I work for, and things I do in my free time. But I'm also a father, a husband, a board gamer, a bass player, a mental health advocate. I just love sort of music in general, and I really like words. I love language and the meanings of words and surrealist comedy, horror podcasts. I like traveling and meeting people. I like bringing especially dissimilar people together in a room to talk about some shared passion. Like, hi, Abstractions, we're a thing. I really like this. I love these conferences because you get so many different perspectives that you wouldn't have otherwise. The point I'm trying to make is, I'm complex, right? I'm not just this one slide person. There's a lot of aspects to that. There's a lot of angles that go on here. But that's true of you all as well. It's true of all of us, all around the world. And the challenge is when you bring any group of these complex individuals together in any one space, under any one banner, those edges rub, right? And that's just bringing people together in the same room to talk? What if you gather those people across the globe? And now we've introduced latency, communication protocol mismatches, operational barriers, different types of change management, and that's just like how we try to talk to each other problems. So why would we choose distributed from the outset? And this is approximate numbers, actually. We do have about 1,500 plus-ish elasticians in 41 countries around the globe. So to understand why we chose this, I think it's important to look back on history a little bit. If monuments exist as this sort of message from the past to the present to remind us of something that occurred in the past, I guess the best we have in startup world is GitHub. So, interesting fact, around February 2010, Shai opened Elasticsearch, released it on GitHub as an open source project. We had that, a repository, issues page, a Google group, which I think was just a mailing list at the time, and an IRC channel. Like, that's all that existed. And from that, more and more people joined and began that process of working on an open source project. Right? And open source, by default, doesn't care where you're from. Right? You don't have to be in the same room to work on an open source project together. That's sort of the great benefit of it. And when the company was founded in 2012, we had our founders originally in Israel, the Netherlands, and Germany just to begin with. Eventually this became Netherlands and Germany, but nevertheless. And so an interesting thought here is, who do we hire first? Right, now that you've got 4 folks that are starting the company, who's the next person you hire? Would it make sense to hire an engineer who could tackle difficult problems? Probably. But what we did was hire a CFO. It was a deliberate step that if we're going to hire anyone anywhere around the globe, we have to be able to navigate the complexities of how do I pay someone that lives in a country where I don't even understand what the tax code is. So that's an important problem to solve. So CFO was the first person we hired. From the outset, we knew we wanted to hire people anywhere without having to worry about that. So the challenges here, when we're hiring worldwide, we could do it just to try and get closer to our customers, just to get a really convenient, like, follow the sun support protocol. But there are way better ways to do that that don't involve hiring people all over the globe in various countries, some of them being the only person in that country that works there. It is far too challenging to manage a global workforce to want to do that just for those benefits. So what do we get? What do we get out of this process of creating a distributed team, a distributed company? And honestly, it's this diversity. It's the fact that we can hire anyone all over the world with different life experiences. Right? We all approach problems differently when we encounter them. We're affected by our past and our present, but also the environment that we live in. And the great benefit of hiring different people, a diverse group, is that any decision, by default, you're countering the groupthink bias. Like that fact that if you've got a group of people who are really similar, you're probably going to reach a consensus on what you should do really quickly. But if you have a group of lots of dissimilar people, it might take much longer to reach consensus, but that decision is going to stand up to the test of time. It's already been tested by different points of view. And I'm not going to do all the legwork for you to just Google why is diversity good for my company. There are many economic benefits as well. So it's one of those great things that not only is it good because it can make you more successful, but it's also the right thing to do. And there's a key word choice I'm using here as well. It should be pointed out that I'm not using the word remote. We're not a remote company. We're not even a remote first company. We're a distributed company. We say this because there's not really an office that everyone is in and then a group of remote employees. Our biggest office is in Mountain View, California. That's the headquarters for the US. Amsterdam is the headquarters for Europe. But even most of our engineering folks that live near there don't go into the office. They work from home. So this is the first question people might ask when you talk about working from home or working remotely. How do you know people are working? And the very simple answer is because the work gets done. Right? This is absolutely true. It has to start from that first step. People have to be trusted to get the work done, and it can be proved because it's accomplished. It doesn't matter whether someone's sitting in an office for 8 hours a day or they worked 3 hours really hard in the morning and then we're like, you know what, that problem took it all out of me. I'm done for today. But the task still got done. They don't have to hang around for no reason. I think the best story about this was in a blog post a number of years ago now at this point on our blog. We had a support engineer named Antonio. And Antonio had always wanted to travel Asia. He lives in Europe at the time. And so he asks his manager, like, hey, is this possible? Could I still work and then travel around Asia at the same time? His manager said, yeah, that's totally possible. Let's figure out how to make it happen. So he did. He exchanged his hours in Europe with someone else who covered his support tickets at the time. He actually worked on APJ hours for this entire process, answering tickets for that region instead of his home region, which means he got to experience not just new work experience with customers he never dealt with before, but he got to experience new cultures. He met his colleagues in Asia at the time that he never got to work alongside in the same room, and experienced that camaraderie of an entirely different culture and time zone. And he got to take all that experience, all these lessons learned from broadening his scope of, from Europe to Asia, and then bring that back when he came back to Europe, right? This is all brought into his work. All of this experience is brought in, and everything got done. Everything got done while he was there. There was no issue with him completing the work he needed to do. And this trust needs to extend to our team organization as well. So each team within Elastic, if you're subdividing further and further, largely we're divided up by product or solution that we work on. And those teams get to decide how they operate at any given point in time. Do we need to do a daily stand-up? Do we meet once a week, every 2 weeks? What time zone do we have that in? Is that a mandatory meeting? Do we do it through email? All these things are decided as makes sense for that organization. We had a separate product management organization that got rolled into engineering just so they could be that much closer to that group. So I promised there are some challenges. Global hiring is difficult. We've had a few challenges that we're able to overcome, some that we just kind of accept as a difficulty that we need to just handle, and some are daily reminders that we're all a little bit different from each other. So communication is one, like just communicating on the fact, like across the globe is difficult. Time zones, I think, are the one unsolved problem in tech forever. Decision making, right? Consensus, yet another consistent problem with distributed systems. And different cultures, which is, of course, the problem inherent with diversity. What are the challenges of bringing a bunch of people with completely different life experiences together in one place? So I'm going to go through a little bit of tools for communication. I'm going to kind of tackle these one at a time. This is largely the only place where any specific tool matters in any way with how we deal with it. Most of the rest of the challenges are overcome with deliberate process. So for synchronous communication, it's pretty normal. We use Slack for the most part, chatting over text, which is sort of mostly synchronous. And we use Zoom. I think Zoom is pretty ubiquitous at this point. I don't have to explain what it is. But if you don't know, it's video chat, not unlike Skype. The great thing is it handles lots and lots of folks in the same room. So we use Zoom for everything. For asynchronous communication, we use GitHub, especially the engineering org, but pretty much the whole Elastic organization uses GitHub to track work and issues that come up. And I think 1 billion emails a day. I have no idea at this point. But we have a lot of emails. And that's because we need to have record of decisions and conversations that we have. And sometimes email is just the best way to do it. But all that trust comes with some challenges too. We have anyone can send to all at, and anyone can send to the entire dev mailing list, which is a good thing, and periodically leads to moments like this, which you can see it in the front row, but probably not in the back, so I'll go through it. At one point, we had Vlad invite the entire dev organization to use Google Calendar. He's been using it to manage his time, and it's worked out really well. Which, of course, started a chain of more emails. I would also highly recommend Google Mail. And why not Google Disk while we're at it? Perhaps as a referral bonus. Hey, I've been using Google Docs. It's really great for collaboration. All my friends and family connect on Google+. And that Google Wave thing, I think that's really going to change how we collaborate on this team. So yeah, it's great fun, right? It's not just about the seriousness. People make mistakes, and when they do, you can have fun with it. It doesn't have to be a big issue. It also means we have a pile of email filters. You can't survive without email filters. When I first started, I expected to have maybe I'll have a welcome email, a couple messages from mailing lists. And at the time, when I joined and I was on the full dev mailing list, I also got all the build failures and successes and all the other chatter. So within I don't know, maybe 6 hours of having an email address, I had 500 email messages. So yeah, filters are a thing. We also no longer send build failures to all of dev because that was a terrible decision. So communication process. This is what's far more valuable in how we communicate. The tools are what work for us. I think they'll probably work for you too. I don't really know what other tools there are. But the process, I think, is far more valuable. By default, our group starts open. Right? Any communication question shouldn't start with, why should I share this, but why shouldn't I share this information with the rest of the team or the rest of the company? It's very often that our CEO might make announcements in all at just because. It's important that everyone is welcomed into the conversation and not marginalized out of it, right? So it's not this, you're not allowed to be here. It's always this open chat. And this default open isn't just about what's going on inside the company. We also have all our Slack channels are open. You can join any team in Slack and talk to them. Our team meetings, all those meetings I talked about that happen in different ways at different times, those are all welcome for anyone else to join them. So if you want to jump in on another team's meeting just to see how they do their process, that's totally available. Maybe you have something you want to talk to them about. Our email groups for every group, so you can join dev, even if you're not on the dev team. You can join the marketing emails if you want. If you want to get all of our automated messages from Meetup, join our Meetups group. And calendars, right? All of our calendars show up for everybody, so we know what's going on. The second part is defaulting to distributed. Any meeting that we have at Elastic starts with a Zoom channel and a Zoom invite. It has to start that way, because anything that doesn't automatically excludes part of your team. So if there's a meeting, it involves Zoom. Everyone's on that call. It's not uncommon to see like 5 people in the same room, all in the same Zoom chat from their own laptops. That's a pretty normal thing. And they'll open to the whole company. So yeah, absolutely. The minute we forget we're a global company and that we're not all in the same place is a complete failing. We can't function as a distributed team if we don't think of that first. It's very often like kids are on meetings too. I have very often as I'm on, it's always, all day I'm working down in my office and they could have come down at any time, but it's only once I start a meeting that everyone's like, hey dad, can I hang out down here? But totally normal, totally welcome, because that's the environment that you work in. That's true of our company all-hands meetings as well. So with 600 some active participants in this Zoom chat, this is the CEO of the company addressing everybody from the call room of the Mountain View office by himself. He's not standing up in front of everyone there in a big meeting room while everyone else has to remote in. It's all remote from the beginning. A lot of these meetings are also recorded. So company all-hands might happen at a really convenient time for the Pacific Coast, but that's probably not super useful for folks in India and China. These meetings are recorded. Usually the agendas are published ahead of time. So even if you're not there in that moment, you can go back. You don't miss the meeting. You can watch the recording, you can follow the agenda, and still get the same value out of it. One-to-ones are really important. Like, it's super important to have these one-to-one meetings, not even just with your managers, although those are probably the most valuable and most obvious, but also with other parts of your team. Right? You're not in that environment where you sit next to each other and bump into each other and say, did you catch that ludicrous display last night? You have to do that purposefully. So these one-to-one meetings, even with your managers, aren't just about what's happening with work and how are you, but like, hey, how are your kids? Did you go camping this weekend? Like, what music are you into right now? Like, oh, hey, I see that in the background of your video. I love that group. So it's really cool. It's all about learning who we are and connecting there. So time zones. This is time zones. So I wasn't lying. My team, we say we're the most distributed, like, per capita. We believe there's another team that's technically more distributed, but they have far more people than we do. So we have 23 people in 14 countries and 12 time zones. That's absolutely true. I was trying to count them all up and I lost a time zone or two, but it doesn't really matter when your spread is from Pacific time to Sydney. There's not much between those two that we're missing. Yeah, it's a real challenge on our team. So the community team meetings, these are the convenient times to have meetings. Oh, wait. Right? Like, there's just not one. So when we do meetings, they're opt-in. You might be, for a number of reasons. A lot of us, because it's the community team, travel a lot. You might be physically unable to call into it, so that's totally fine. Or you might be asleep. The meetings, for me, happen right now So I'm East Coast. Oh, we're East Coast here. That's even better. So 10:30 a.m. is one of them, and then 2 weeks later it happens 2 in the morning. I'm not expected to be at the 2 in the morning call, which is wonderful. Again, some teams are different, and what's good for that team is different. So our support team, where they really require everyone to be on that call and communicate, they move their meeting through time zones, and it's going to suck for you at some point, but it's going to come back, and it's going to suck for somebody else later on. It's kind of the cost of it as well. But when possible, we make them opt-in, we make them recorded, we share the agenda. It's completely possible for you to say, hey, I really wanted to mention this on the meeting. Could you do that for me? Completely an acceptable way to do it. Or if it can wait, talk about it next time. So yeah, time zones are difficult. There's some pain points there, and we have ways to work around it. So decisions. This is an issue. They're slow. They can sometimes drag for a long time because you start an email thread of, hey, here's a challenge, some bug that we're encountering with Elasticsearch. Here's how I think we should solve it. Someone answers, no, I don't think we should do this. And you just got this long process that's inherent with asynchronous communication, especially if your team is in Europe, the Pacific, US coast, in China. It's going to take a while for these to happen. That's kind of an accepted cost. We have some values that I'll get into later that try to stem this off a little bit. But yeah, decisions are going to be slower than they could be otherwise. But all those decisions should be documented. That's really important. No decision is made that doesn't go through an email at some point to say, here's the decision we made, here's the process of how we got there. Sometimes that's done for code and is in GitHub issues. Sometimes it's email if it's like a company or process decision. But it's all documented somewhere that's not like Slack or a Zoom chat or a coffee shop meeting. Those are all ephemeral things that do not help communicate to people what's going on. And probably the biggest thing that we're going to talk about here, the problem inherent of a highly diverse group, is the different cultures. They're going to clash. It's going to be difficult to manage this. One of the first things we think about is hiring really carefully. It's generally, and it may have changed because we've ramped up hiring, but I don't think so. It's generally a long process to get hired at Elastic. I had some extenuating circumstances, but I think I applied in August of 2017, and I got the job in November. Now, I organized an entire conference in October, so that's kind of right out. But nevertheless, there's still this long process between, hey, we think you might be a good fit too. Let's start this interview process. Even when we're hiring rapidly, it's important that we get buy-in on this person across the team, whether it's a peer, their managers, the higher-ups. It needs to make sure that this person not only has the skills, but that they're able to communicate clearly, that we know they're going to be able to ask for help when they need it, that we know that they're going to be there on the Zoom call and able to talk to people through that, and that they can do all that. These skills are harder to teach than can you write in this particular language. And so that's really what we want to interview for when we're looking to hire folks. And we don't do whiteboarding because it's really hard to do through Zoom, and also it's dumb. My manager once told me the worst advice he ever got from a venture capitalist was hire fast, fire fast. He said, I would much rather hire slow and fire folks never. That inherent cost with cycle, especially when you're talking about a long onboarding process because they're not even in the same room as their team, totally not worth it. At one point, I don't know. I started in November 2017. We had just about 700 folks in Elastic, and we're just over 1,600 now, which is not quite 2 years later. So this is still true, even though we're going through that growth process. So what I think is the main thing that ties us together, the main thing that helps combat the cultural diversity is representative in our source code. This is an actual page on our About section. So if you go to elastic.co, click on About, there's a section that says source code. You can read this, so I don't have to read it to you because you're probably reading it while I was talking anyway. But the idea is these aren't necessarily specific values, but these are things that we do value. Some of them are aspirational. Some of them are about how we operate. But all of them is about what makes Elastic Elastic. So I want to talk about them a little bit so you understand where we're coming from. Your group may have different values, but I think it's good to go through. So the first one is home and dinner. I wanted to point something out about this picture because I thought it was really interesting the first time I went through this. It just struck me. All of these pictures are of a different type of family and a different group experiencing home and dinner. What does it mean to them to be home for dinner? You've got one group that's just two people sitting in front of a TV. You've got a rather orthodox family over on the right side that are all sitting down together, mother and father and all the kids at the table. You've got a couple walking dogs. You've got another couple sitting at a table by themselves, probably out to eat for a nice dinner. And all of these families look totally different. This isn't something that was pointed out. It's just included in home and dinner, that we are all diverse. The diversity aspect of it isn't a goal or a number or an achievement. We do measure it. We do work to improve other diversity aspects, but it's table stakes for us that we hire people that look differently. So this goes on to say work-life balance is a myth. I absolutely agree. You don't try to have like work-friends balance or life Netflix balance is not a thing. Like, we try to find balance in our lives, and work is a part of that. For some folks, I know I've got a colleague on the community team who travels, like, probably 90% of his work time is spent traveling. He loves it. That's totally cool for him. I need to be home periodically because I have kids that want to know what I look like. So it's different for all of us. And Elastic commits that you should be able to be home for dinner. This is what my calendar sort of looks like. And you'll notice, they are pink on my screen, but everything is the same color here. Well, the top and bottom blocks that are sort of red pinkish are times I've blocked on my calendar to say I'm not at all available. The top one is because I'm asleep. And the bottom one is because this is when I need to be with my family for dinner, and this is when we do bedtimes. If it's really important, I could do a meeting. You'll see I have a meeting during that next Tuesday. And that's because it's with this person who lives in Sydney. So we have very limited time that we can actually be on a call together where we're not both asleep. So it works out. The other one is space and time, which I always read as space-time. But yeah, space-time. The idea here is that you have the space and time to get a break from the daily routine. So this kind of sounds very googly, right? You have time to work on those side projects. And they don't necessarily have to be this awesome, innovative side project that you work on. Maybe it's just this proof of concept you had where, hey, what if we wrote this portion of the code in Kotlin? What would that look like? And you can go try that. It could even be, hey, these sort of low-hanging fruit bugs that are really minor are driving me insane. I need to just go fix them today. And I know I have other deadlines, but I really need to work on this right now. And we give the space and time to work on what matters to you. And with that experimentation comes the freedom to fail. You're expected to have some results from your space-time. You're expected to have some results from the experimentation you do. But the fact that that product really doesn't work in Kotlin, turns out, is an acceptable result from that. That's encouraged, in fact. We find out where we get, what works and what doesn't. This sort of exemplifies all the complexities that are in us and in our systems. It depends. And if you've ever been to an Elastic booth at a conference and asked us a question like, how do you do X? You almost invariably have been answered, well, it depends. And it's absolutely true, right? People are different. Systems are different. We have all these nuances. There's not necessarily a best practice until we know what the context is, until we know what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to accomplish it with. So it depends is another key one. Progress and simple perfection. This is where I talked about decision-making. This is what we use to kind of stem that long decision-making process. We would rather start to make progress on something so that we can iterate towards success than worry about starting at the perfect place. This is exemplified a couple different ways. We've had defaults, right? So the default settings in Elastic, some of them have been chosen rather arbitrarily, sometimes to their fault, which has been a problem, right? We had shards, right? When you started up an index, the default number of shards was, 5, I guess. Because, 5, I guess. That seems like a good place to start. And these have been long-running debates. The debate on how many shards to start with by default, I think, has existed since Elasticsearch has existed. And eventually we changed it because we want to work towards something better. Now it's 1 because 1. Because the number one problem we found was that folks had too many shards in their system. So now we work another way. We iterate and try and improve that. And that all is part of the failure and resilience cycle, right? We start to make progress. We find out things don't work. We can iterate on that as long as we're continuing to make progress. Complex systems sort of exist degraded anyway, and it's all about that improvement. It's not about perfect functionality. And this was a quote that I thought was great from Redeploy conference. This is last year. Sent out, it's the start of a new week, start of a clean slate. Remember, you'll succeed this week and you'll fail this week, and both are valuable. And this is absolutely something we care about, leveraging the past and our lessons there for a better future. Also, you should check out re-deploy.io because it's an awesome conference happening later this year too. It's the right URL, right? Okay, good. This is another part of it, O1, O2, and /format. This is a reminder that we all operate a little bit differently, that our communication works a little bit differently. In fact, can you tell me what O1, O2 refers to? Maybe it's a date? What date is it? Right. Is it January 2nd or is it February 1st? It depends on who we're talking about. So this is something we have to keep in mind, right? We all interpret things a little bit differently. The format of our communications has to be clearly defined. It's a reminder, in fact, that we all have an accent. No matter who we are, we have an accent to somebody. There's no default. The most obvious time this happened is when I was having a meeting with our team, and I said, I don't know if this conference gives us the most bang for our buck. And my Austrian colleague just turned his head sideways and said, I have no idea what you just said. So I had to explain. I don't think it gives us enough value for the cost, right? Yeah, it's funny, but you just run headlong into these moments where you just don't understand each other, despite the fact you're speaking the same language. That can be challenging, and when it becomes a challenge, the important thing there is to assume good intent. Remember that we're all working for the same company, on the same team, presumably towards the same goals. And so if we've had this moment where we clash and don't connect, probably was a misunderstanding. It's probably an issue of format and accent, and probably not an issue of malicious intent. So there's times you have to work through it. Sometimes you have lengthy Slack messages back and forth. Eventually you probably end up in a Zoom chat one-on-one with somebody so you can work it out and say, here's where I'm coming from, I get where you're coming from, how do we meet somewhere in the middle? And the last, and probably the one that speaks to the diversity aspect more directly and how we encourage that, is as you are, right? Everyone here is encouraged to come to work as they are and work the way that makes sense to them. This picture, I think, again, is really interesting. It shows someone standing up at a standing desk, someone lounging in a comfortable chair with a cat. It shows a pregnant woman in the corner sitting on an exercise ball. Everyone here, just at that level, operates differently. It's important to give people the freedom to work as they want to, rather than, like, can you fit this mold and come into the office and behave a certain way. I think a great theory to explain why this is valuable is spoon theory. Has anyone heard of this before? A few people? Cool. So it started with folks that experience chronic fatigue and how to explain that to someone else, right? So I get a certain number of spoons every day. Certain actions cost spoons, and when I'm out of them, I'm done, right? I need to rest. And for someone with chronic fatigue, they might not get as many spoons as you do per day. It's sort of been expanded to kind of talk about that concept. Different tasks take different amount of energy from different people. For someone, getting up, taking a shower every morning, putting on a full suit and going to work is totally normal and totally acceptable. For other people, that's an effort to fit that mold and to become that person and to live that in an office. So we could have them expend their spoons doing that, just trying to become part of the work environment, or we could say, hey, do your thing. Come as you are, work as you need to, and all that extra energy now, like at the most selfish, can be devoted back to the company, right? Rather than spend half your energy just being there, you can spend all of your energy working on the problems you have and providing us yet another unique perspective. So humble and ambitious. I think this is a key factor. This is the last one on our value list. Ambition is good, right? Ambition is what wants you to drive to be better, wants you to drive to something more, but it's important to be humble about it as well. No one of us is more valuable than another. We can neither function well without our lead regional sales rep bringing a $1 million contract as without our document writers. All of these people are valuable to that process. We need all of them to be there. So it's common for us to be able to challenge folks in authority as well and have conversations with the the CEO, like, hey, I don't know if I agree with this. And he might say, well, we don't have a choice. But he'll talk with you about it, right? That's totally acceptable. And this term I've talked about before, elastician. I think this has been really valuable to this whole culture aspect as well. At some point, we sent an email around saying, hey, there's a lot of us now. What do we call ourselves? Kind of like you have Googlers or Amazonians. It's sort of a small step that seems superficial, just putting a label on it, but it gives you an identity to belong to together, right? It takes all those differences that we have and says, yeah, but we're all elasticians. New employees are welcomed into that when everyone comes. A brief story about joining the company. When I started, I actually met our CEO, Shai, like at an Elasticon tour event. And it was just like, oh, hey, Aaron, I was excited for you to join. Like, it's just hugs from the beginning. It was pretty awesome. I just looked at my clock. I should have looked much sooner. We'll get you out. The other thing is, folks, when you start, we're flown into X School. When we first started, everything was sort of Marvel and superhero themed. So X School is, in fact, named for Xavier School for gifted youngsters. Everyone's welcomed into the culture that is Elastic. And what I think is really interesting is one of the days of this X School is Elastic Swag Day, where not only are you asked to wear whatever Elastic swag you've been sent in your welcome package, but the whole company is asked, hey, today is the day to wear your Elastic swag, take a picture of yourself or your colleagues, or together, not like secretly taking pictures of colleagues, post them to our water cooler channel. Like, this is just to say, hey, I see you joining us, welcome to the team. Like, we're all part of this together. Another really important aspect is physically being together, and in fact, eating together. I think there's something special that happens with humans when we sit down and have a meal together, and this is important as well. So it's not good enough just to work completely remote. It is important to get together in real space. We have engineering all-hands meetings, usually twice a year. We used to have specifically a sales kickoff, but now that's become our global all-hands where the entire company gets together and we sort of tack everything on. And there's support summits and other teams get together throughout the year to see each other in space, to deal with those things that really are easier to do in the same room. And during that process, it's not just business, but we have fun too, right? The team that dances together stays together. Cool. So I'm going to try and share this story quick and kind of get through the end of it here, but status checks are super important. You may see this elastic heart as a sticker on our table, and now I'm going to tell you where it came from. In August of 2016, after a leadership meeting, an email was sent out from Shai to the entire company that simply said, I heart you all, I thought you should know. And something like 140 replies later, again, remember this is all at, Mihao, on our design team, sent a reply that was the elastic heart. And it became a sticker, it went on shirts, and what it did was it took all the history of this email, all this thing that occurred, and turned it into this symbol that we could share with each other. It's a Slack emoji. And so it's a way to say to our colleagues, hey, I don't just like what you do, I elastic heart it. I think that's really awesome. And the other important note is this email chain is still going. So I got an email yesterday that's the I heart you all email. And it's just this periodic cycle of love and like adorable gifts with hearts in them. And it's amazing. Like, it's just this thing that keeps going. It was one of the first emails I received when I started joining the company. And there's never a moment where I get, oh, an all out email and see I heart you all and I'm upset about it. It's always welcome. It's really awesome. And it's an important part about connecting as a distributed company. So, let me try and wrap up. The value gained here is not just about scaling. It's not just applying efficient work close to the edge. Because again, those aren't sufficient reasons for building a globally distributed organization. The challenges are too big to make it worth that outcome. So the benefit here is as humans, we carry all these experiences with us. We're all unique, we're all complex, and approach problems differently. And having all that insight on the same team, that's the value. There are challenges to overcome. And the biggest thing, the one thing I think that really brings it all together, that makes it work, is the sense of community that we build, right? It started with open source. We build a community around our products. It's carried into the community where we build part of the Elastic community. And it's not something we say where, oh, our customers are Elastic community or our open source people are the Elastic community. It's everyone. It's all the folks that do that and all the folks that do work for the company as well. So yeah, I'm trying to cut through it so I can end here. Yeah, the main thing, everything's about making people feel welcomed, about joining the community. It's about supporting personal, unique situations, about building human action, and about our resilience overcoming challenges. It's about ambition and humility, and that we all have an accent, and it's through space and time, and all that we can be home for dinner. So thank you. Hopefully this was insightful for you, and if you want to work for Elastic, come talk at the booth.